As if we needed yet another reminder of just how bad 2020 has been as a year. It's like it goes beyond just being bad to like somebody's doing this with purpose, malice, and intent. And whatever message we're supposed to be getting, I hope we're getting from it because I sure want 2021 to be at least a little bit better. But the NFL community, the Chicago Bears community as a whole, certainly, was rocked with some sad news yesterday at the announcement of the Kansas Comet himself, Gale Sayers, passing away at the age of 77. One of the true legends and icons in Kansas Jayhawk football history. You might say, well, that doesn't mean much. Well, when you talk about Gale Sayers goes to your school, it means something at least in that time. That's why he's a college football Hall of Famer. That's why his jersey was retired by the school. And you talk about the Kansas Comet in the National Football League. This is a guy that you're talking about, Pro Football Hall of Famer, has his jersey retired by the Bears. And just one of the true legends, one of the true icons, and one of the truly gifted halfbacks and overall talents the game of football has ever seen and will ever see, frankly, lost his life yesterday after his battle with dementia. And it's sad. Certainly no doubt about it. Now, clearly, Gale Sayers was before my time. But in no way, shape, or form does that not mean I can't at least have some understanding, some appreciation, some respect, and some understanding again of the impact that this man had, just how legendary and iconic of a presence he really was. For a guy that I think played a total of maybe 71 games in his pro football career, you're talking about somebody that to this day, the old heads, as I would call them, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, that they will still talk about just how truly transcendent a talent Gale Sayers is, just how truly special a talent of Gale Sayers is, Like everybody talks about Jim Brown, and Jim Brown being one of those truly legendary all-time players. And they talk about Gale Sayers in a similar type of breath. And when you think about the sustained length of career that Jim Brown had by comparison, it's striking when you think about Gale Sayers played just over 70 games in his career. Realistically, had about 4.5 seasons of actual action. And yet, people still revere this man to this day and talk about his athletic feats and talk about his skills on the football field. That's how you know that somebody transcends a position, transcends a game, and frankly, transcends time. Gale Sayers is talked about in a similar light with guys such as Jim Brown, such as Walter Payton, such as Barry Sanders. Those truly, truly, truly timeless players, those icons of the running back position. And when you think about the Kansas Comet, came into the league, on the heels of the Bears in '65 drafting Dick Butkus number 3. Here comes Gale Sayers at number 4. Back-to-back picks. Like you talk about all-time coups, the fact that Hallis was able to position his team in a way that they could take these two great legends, these two great studs, these two great icons of the organization, icons of their positions, and icons of the league and the game of football in general, and back-to-back picks still has to be one of the single greatest individual draft day accomplishments of all time. You've even had other teams take 2 Hall of Famers in the first round. I think of the Bucks when they took Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks. I think of the Ravens when they took Jonathan Ogden and Ray Lewis. They took multiple Hall of Famers with their first round pick. That does not happen very often. But even then, it just doesn't hold a candle. Those great players, those legends, those Hall of Famers, Butkus and Sayers. And you think about them. They're so closely tied to the identity of that team during the 60s and going into the very beginning of the 70s, and still in a lot of ways so closely associated with the identity and the history of the Chicago Bears organization, even though that was a lot of losing football back then. Even though, especially in the case of Gale Sayers, his peak career happened over 5 decades ago. That if anything else, should serve as a representation of just how truly special and magnificent this talent was. When you think about the Kansas Comet, you think about it a little bit like a comet. It comes and flies into the screen, or flies into view, and you don't see it all the time. It burns brightly, it's spectacular, and then all too quickly it's gone and you don't see it again. Kind of fitting when you think about Gale Sayers' career. Like, he was called the Kansas Comet in part because of his speed and his explosiveness and his open field running ability and his game changing, game breaking abilities. And now, when you really think about that nickname, it just holds an entirely different and even more significant meaning because it really represents who he was as a player. When you think about Gale Sayers coming into the league as a rookie in '65, this is a guy that came in and set the league on fire. 22 total touchdowns as a rookie, still an NFL rookie record that I'm not sure will ever be broken in a 14-game season. Now, think about that. This is not a league where you had 32 teams, so you had a bunch of expansion and roster talent diluted. Like, in his era, this key thing, but in his era, he was truly facing off against the best of the best, and not only that, you're talking about at a time where you only played 14 games. 14 games. He was doing all of these spectacular things in a 14-game schedule. Imagine what he would have done in a 16-game schedule. But you're talking about his rookie season, 22 touchdowns, most notably the game at Wrigley against the 49ers where he scored 6 touchdowns in one game in that sloppy, mucky mess of a muddy Wrigley Field that day. It's where Gale Sayers' ability to be able to run on his toes and cut and react quicker than the defenders could certainly came into play that day. And also another thing that Gale Sayers is always known for, besides just the speed and the athleticism, the game-breaking open field ability, was the great peripheral vision, the feeling, the instincts, the understanding of where he was, where the defense was, and how he could set things up. Like, you go back and you watch Gale Sayers' highlights, and you say, damn, this dude was special. Like, no question. You look at some of the runs he hit, some of the things he could do, both as a runner and as a pass catcher and as a return specialist. It's not a coincidence that not only just a few years into his career was he on the NFL's 75th anniversary career, team. Again, talking about a guy who only really had 71-ish games in his NFL career. You're talking about really 5 full seasons in that time of action, effectively. You're talking about a guy that made the 75th anniversary team and not only made it as a halfback, but also made it as a return specialist. He was the only guy to make it as 2 positions. He was arguably the preeminent open field runner of his time, arguably the preeminent dual-purpose threat running back when you factor in pass catching and receiving skills. And on top of that, he was arguably the preeminent return specialist of his time. Well, when I always think about Gale Sayers' career, I think of a couple of things. That great rookie season in '65. Then he comes back the next year in '66 and he leads the league in rushing. He has another really good year in '67. But in '68, you get to that game against the 49ers where his knee gets blown out. And you look, and all the thoughts back then was running backs don't come back from those type of knee injuries. It was a devastating knee injury, tore multiple ligaments, etc. Like, he's not going to come back. Not only did Gale Sayers come back, but in the season of '69, on a really, really crappy Bears team, a lot of them were crappy back then, on a really, really bad Bears team, where you had Dick Butkus winning the Defensive Player of the Year award, I believe, that year on a 1-13 team. Here's Gale Sayers in the '69 season, coming back from that knee injury, which people didn't do back then. They did not do. Forget the talk about it takes 2 years or it takes 3 years to recover. A lot of people just didn't come back from that. And yet Gale Sayers came back, had to adapt and change his running style, and he was not quite the explosive open field runner, not quite the same threat in terms of a tackle breaker and a tackle avoider, a defender misser, as he was earlier in his career. And he still came back in the league in '69 and he led the league in rushing. It was like 2 different backs, and he found 2 different ways to lead the league in rushing. Just tremendous. And you think about just how special this guy really was. Like, some of younger fans, or maybe some fans that are not that familiar, when they look back at his stats and they say, his stats don't stack up all that well. Less than 40 career rushing touchdowns, etc. Certainly don't look that way. But it's got to tell you something that when he retired after the 71 season, because he just physically couldn't do it anymore, that he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And he, at the time, was the youngest person to ever be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canada. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, still to this day is. Like, he was so special in his time that he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And he only played basically effectively 5 seasons worth of football. And even with some of that, he wasn't properly fully utilized because he was splitting duty with others, notably Brian Piccolo. And let's get to that in a minute. When you think about Gale Sayers and his impact, it goes beyond just the football field. And here was a guy that in the 70s served as an athletic director at a university for several years. But more than that, what he may be known to a lot of folks as is by the portrayal by Billy D. Williams of him in the movie Brian Song. Like, to this day, widely thought of as one of the greatest sports movies of all time. Think about it. You had young, peak of his career James Caan, young, peak of his career Billy D. Williams. It's about competition and camaraderie and bro love and how you overcome, obstacles and challenges. Like, it's a movie that can resonate with everyone, whether you're a football fan or not. Everybody understands the wretchedness of the disease that is cancer. Everybody can understand, losing somebody close to you, a friend, a family member, a loved one, a teammate, to something like that. And all of these years later, people still think about that movie Brian Song, still refer to it as one of the great sports movies of all time, arguably one of the greater movies of all time. I certainly am looking forward to trying to watch that movie again real soon. But even when you think about Gale Sayers and later on in his career, and you think about the fact that this is a guy that is always looked at and always looked upon as one of the truly great talents of his generation, that flame burned so incredibly brightly, but didn't burn for that long. And it serves as a little bit of a thing is, 'tis better to be great even for a little while at one thing to never have experienced greatness at all. That certainly represents Gale Sayers in a nutshell. For his family, my sympathies certainly go out to them. Sucks for my fellow Bears fans. It does suck. Like, you just
look at it and you say, yeah, this is no bueno. This is no bueno. We've had enough in 2020, and I agree. We could have done without this right now. But I hope that it was peaceful for Gale. I hope that he did not have to suffer. Something like dementia is a really bad disease, and unfortunately, it took another person, and a great icon, a great man at that, in the Kansas Comet, Gale Sayers. So for those of you that may be Bears fans or just football fans in general, you can feel free to chime in the comments with your thoughts on the life, career, the legacy of Gale Sayers, even though I understand there may be a few of you that actually are old enough to actually have remembered watching the Kansas Comet. A lot of you may not. But if anything, it'll be nice to kind of see and hear some of those stories from some of you and just talking about his impact and his legacy and his greatness. Rest in peace, Kansas Comet, Mr. Sayers. You are gone, but you certainly will never be forgotten.